Greetings, I'm Aaron Balve, and this is me trying Guandao Fa, secretly transmitted methods of the Guandao. This video is the third part of a little series within the series, a little mini-series discussing reconstructing a Hanwei Pudao. In the first video I talked about how I converted a Hanwei Pudao into a more historically accurate Dao polearm, sort of akin to a late-Ming zhanmadao, but something that I've used for a Guandao practice. And in the second video, I performed a form for my tradition using my Frankensteinian creation. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about how the weapon feels. I'm going to compare wielding a comparatively historically accurate Dao polearm, my converted Hanwei Pudao, to wielding a modern wushu Guandao, kind of a lightweight modern wushu Guandao. And before I get into the kind of the nitty-gritty details of how the weapons feel, I will just quickly review kind of the stats. So my converted weapon is about 92 inches long and weighs about 7 pounds 4 ounces. Now these lightweight Guandao polearms are probably around 80 inches or usually a little bit less, and weigh about 4 pounds or usually a little bit less. So my weapon, my converted Hanwei Pudao, is not quite twice as heavy as these lightweight wushu Guandao, but close to it, and it's probably a foot longer, or maybe a little more than a foot longer. So when I first started practicing with my converted Hanwei Pudao, I was really surprised at how simple the transition was in some ways. And for kind of just basic slashes and thrusts, whether it's with the butt spike or with the blade, it didn't feel all that different. And I think probably some of the reason for that is just the fact that since there is a fairly large spear at the butt end of my converted Hanwei Pudao, it provides good counterbalance, and even though it is a fairly heavy weapon, it feels pretty comfortable, and it doesn't kind of perform as heavy as you might think it would. That said, in Guandao forms, there tends to be a lot of kind of rotating the weapon, whether you're spinning it over your head or whether you're kind of swinging it around your body, both vertically and horizontally. There's a lot of rotation, and some of those maneuvers can get pretty complicated, and it has taken me quite a long time to adjust to the longer, heavier weapon. So first off, I'll say kind of quickly that when I was learning Guandao, my master told me that you should stand up straight. Now, this was only for Dao polearms, for Pudao and Guandao, and then for Yuyachan, another polearm. So by and large, the forms that we practiced were supposed to be very low. All of the boxing forms and the shorter weapons, you're supposed to use a very low stance, which is common in Chinese martial arts. But for Dao polearms, you're supposed to stand up pretty straight for most of the form. When I watch videos on YouTube, however, I do see some martial artists using very low forms, and it looks beautiful. I think if you have the jibengong, if you have the kind of the basic skills to use a low stance, it really looks quite nice. I think, however, if you're using kind of a weapon with a proper historical length, it's much more challenging, because you're just going to hit the weapon in the ground. If you're doing kind of vertical swings, either the butt spike or the blade, it's going to hit the ground, so you have to be standing up pretty straight. So when wielding a lightweight Guandao, again, the grip used in my tradition, and from what I can tell, used in most modern traditions of Chinese martial arts, the grip is that the right hand remains fixed underneath the blade, and the left hand can kind of move to different spots along the shaft, depending on what you're doing. And a lot of the time when you're using a lighter weight Guandao, what I've found is that what usually happens is that for kind of slashing and things, your grip is kind of wide like this, your hand is close to the bottom of the weapon. But then when you're doing rotations, it comes up to about the middle, so that the weapon is sort of rotating around this left hand. Your left hand kind of becomes the center point of rotation for the weapon. Now, the left hand doesn't have to do much work in this position. It's mostly there to just kind of control where the blade is. So all of the strength, for the most part, of the motion is still coming from your right hand, and the left hand is just sort of there to keep things in place. With the larger, heavier polearm, you can still wield it like that, and that's how I was usually wielding it in the beginning of my practice when I first started using the weapon. But what I found is that you just can't get the weapon up to speed. It's very slow and looks quite sluggish when you're using the weapon in that way. The only way to have the larger, heavier weapon move at a kind of a good speed is to add more momentum to your movement. And so when you're doing these kinds of rotations, that left hand, it can't just stay fixed in the center. It actually has to contribute to the swing. So a lot of times, instead of sliding up to the center to just provide a point of rotation, I end up sliding my left hand up much further so that it's quite close to the right hand. And that way it can kind of contribute momentum and force to the swing. And in that sense, you're really wielding the weapon basically like a two-handed sword. It's just like choking up on the pole and wielding the weapon like a sword. And that sort of happens mid-swing. So it's like you initiate the swing with a wider grip and then slide that left hand up, and then you're in two-handed sword mode. And I've found that using that technique, I'm able to get a lot more momentum in the movement of the weapon. You know, essentially you're kind of helping the weapon use its own weight to move, which increases the speed quite a bit. So those are some of the kind of key differences I've noticed so far in my practice. Before I end things, I will say that as much as I love using a Dao polearm that is closer to the real deal, closer to what a historical weapon might have been, I still really love using my lightweight Guandao polearms, and I think that they're not entirely different. It's still there are actually some advantages to the lightweight weapon. So some of them are the fact that since they are so light, you really can practice them. You can practice with them for extended periods of time without getting too tired. If there's a particular move that I really want to explore and try out for a long time, I might practice a single move for 1 or 2 hours, and that's just something that's absolutely not possible with the larger weapon. It's too tiring, and you really get diminished returns practicing for that long. Also, the lightweight weapon, it's much easier to move quickly, to be very fast in your forms. And even though the movements aren't the same, they aren't the exact same as they would be with a more historical weapon, a more historically accurate weapon, being able to kind of test the weapon out at a higher speed does give you kind of a sense for what the move is like when it's being done really fast. And I think it's kind of easier to build up speed with a heavier weapon once you know how it feels how to do it with a lighter weapon. And the last point that I think is really something that should not be overlooked is just that these lighter weight weapons are really, really fun. If you're able to find or to acquire a historically accurate Dao polearm to practice with, that's wonderful, and I think, by all means, use that as much as you can. But I think it's still worth using the lightweight weapons some of the time, and if you aren't able to acquire a historically accurate Dao polearm, practicing with the light ones is still worth your time. So that's all I have today. I hope you've enjoyed this video and this little series within the series. If you have more questions about what a comparatively accurate Dao polearm feels like, let me know in the down below. I always appreciate a like and subscribe. You can check out my handle. I'm Guandao Guy. And other than that, until next time, I'm Qing Guandao, secretly transmitted methods of the Guandao.